Welcome to the podcast Superfriends. 5 podcast producers from across North America get together to discuss podcasting.
Telling you, it's exciting as it sounds. I'm Matt Kundle from the Sound Off Podcast Network, one of 5 podcast Super Friends, as we bring them in. And today we're going to have there's going to be lots of charts and graphs and discussion, but I promise you, this is going to be legendary. We'll go around the horn and introduce ourselves, starting in Detroit.
Legend, wait for it, Dairy. John Gay, Jack and Detroit Podcast. Happy to be here as always.
David.
Oh, I didn't know I was next. David Yaz in Boston, pod617.com, the Boston Podcast Network. In Pod We Trust.
Johnny.
Hi, I'm Johnny, hopefully of johnnypodcast.com by this week, so don't go searching for it just yet, but it'll be there.
Catherine.
I cannot wait to be presenting all of these graphs to our audio-only listeners. My name is Catherine O'Brien, Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
You know, I just didn't think about it, really. And according to the graphs, we don't even need to care about the audio people anymore. Actually, that's wrong.
Let's see where this goes.
No, actually, that's one of the things we're going to talk about today, and that's, you know, the audio video thing. I actually have a couple of graphs about that one. So it's webinar season, and by webinar season, we mean, for whatever reason, March and April seem to be the months when there's a webinar every Thursday. What's that?
Did you introduce yourself, Matt?
Did I what?
Did you introduce yourself?
Introduce yourself.
Oh, I did off the top.
Okay. I just making sure. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm Matt
Kundle from the Sound Off Podcast Network, Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, home of the Winnipeg Jets. It is webinar season. And so there's just nothing but a bunch of like Thursday at 1:00 webinars that come out. Sometimes we make it, sometimes we don't. I always make it to all these things, and I kind of geek out about these things. And we like to watch these things to report back to you. So we're focusing on 3 surveys today. We'll go through each one. The big one, I think, is the infinite dial. That's the one that I think a lot of podcasters have really latched onto over the last number of years. We've got the most slides from that one. Also, last year, we had Jay Nacklis on from Coleman Insights. He was talking about the video research that he'd done with Amplifi Media. There's been a follow-up that was unveiled at Podcast Movement in Chicago. We're going to get a few slides and the update on that one. And the last one comes out of where you are, Jag, Detroit, Jacobs Media. That's Tech Survey. Very much a radio-based survey, but it's still very relevant. I think we'll have a few words to talk about radio, and Catherine's going to have a suggestion about a radio format that just never came to fruition. So I think we'll start off with our first survey. And so this is the infinite dial. Infinite dial comes from Edison Research. Tom Webster presented it for many years. He's since moved on to Sounds Profitable. But I wanted to start with some of the bigger takeaways. Everybody, by the way, in podcasting waits for the podcast slides, but I thought we'd start with social media. Facebook is leading the pack still. The next 2, Instagram and TikTok, are also very popular. And I think that we're going to talk a little bit about that when it comes to social media and Reels. And then as we move down, some of the things that we've spoken about, some of the more, and I don't want to say fringe, but things like Twitter, Reddit, and Johnny, your favorite, Bluesky. Bluesky has clocked in this year. So from what we can see, are there any big takeaways here?
I'm shocked at the Facebook one, but maybe that's just a generational thing. They're all still alive. All the Facebook users are still alive. Maybe it's a social security thing where, you know, they all have accounts still, but maybe not active.
I'd be curious. It's interesting to me that Facebook and Instagram are the top 2 because there's so much bleed over between them where Facebook will show you Instagram Reels and vice versa. Like, where does Facebook end and Instagram begins? To me, that's an interesting question as well. But I know, for example, my sister-in-law basically posts everything on Instagram and it default goes to her Facebook. She doesn't check her Facebook messages, but she's on Instagram all the time. So it's interesting.
I'd just say it's good news for podcasters because I find Facebook relatively user-friendly for the posting of podcasts. It will typically, although not always, auto-populate the image from your episode. And I think LinkedIn is pretty good at that as well, but Instagram and TikTok, I find a little bit challenging to promote just your podcast episode and not, a clip, a reel, etc.
So middle of the pack for our audio listeners, LinkedIn does quite well in the middle, Snapchat and Reddit. And we're not talking about anything involving podcasting. These are just social media brand usage and what people are using. You get down there, Twitter has dropped down. It was in the middle of the pack. It's sort of dropping to the bottom third, followed by Discord, Threads. And Jag, you were talking a little bit about that crossover with Facebook and Threads is now crossing over. The new upstart Blue Sky, and Truth Social and Mastodon, it just gets weird down there at the bottom.
Yeah, when I saw Mastodon, I was like, well, hanging in there. Go Mastodon.
Facebook is still far and away the biggest one. I think that has a lot to do with rural America, local. If there was ever a social media platform that could claim to be local, it would be Facebook. So.
Can I pop in one thing about Facebook before we move on?
Sure.
One of the sort of the communities that I like to follow is the niche website community, because they do a lot about SEO and what's going on with websites and social media, sort of where all of those things play in together. And one of the big players in that field, she posted a little sort of a cute comedy sketch about the friend who still uses Facebook. We all claim that nobody's using Facebook. It's dead. Who keeps using, only Meemaw is using Facebook or whatever. But then you find that Facebook ads work. Selling things on Facebook Marketplace work. So somebody is using Facebook. Somebody is being led with ads and doing the Facebook thing. So even though everybody claims Facebook is dead, it still seems to be, it has its presence. They did a really good job when they were coming out with their API of using. So a lot of people, that's how they got access to all the other websites, is through their Facebook ID, and people got locked in, and they keep continually to be locked in using Facebook, even though they claim, I don't use Facebook anymore.
Podcasting familiarity is at an all-time high. It hasn't grown much over the last few years, but 85% of people polled did know what a podcast was. I think what I like about what I'm seeing in front of me is if you go back to 2016, it was at 55%, and now it's at 85%. So I think it really speaks to the ascension of podcasting.
Especially in the beginning.
Is this now just do we just consider this saturated now? Like because it's well into almost 100%. This is it, or do we have to wait until it's actually reaches that 90% threshold?
Actually, I think there's a slide that's coming up that's going to be the one that does sort of put the crown on the head, as you've just sort of alluded to.
Okay.
70% of Americans have listened to a podcast. Stop me if anything is become completely obvious here.
I think we maybe just remind ourselves that just because you've listened to one podcast doesn't mean it's sort of part of your daily routine of consuming content. That there are still people out there that need to be coached up on how to get into podcasts, but I'm not surprised the growth is good news.
Yeah, we got that slide coming up. Services used most often to listen to podcasts. So this is, I think, the one where I'm a little surprised, but I'm not surprised. Is anybody surprised by seeing YouTube at 33%, Spotify at 26%, and Apple at 14%?
No, but I mean, we've gone over these presentations probably, for the last 4, maybe 5 years. And every year up until maybe now, or the last couple of years, Apple Podcasts, as we've always kind of just colloquially used as the king of podcasting, and now they're third. And
yeah,
just show hands, who knows what Spotify and YouTube have that Apple currently does not have when it comes to podcasts.
Yeah.
Video. That's right.
The only thing I'd quickly add there is, we'll get to this, I think, but a lot of people still listen to podcasts in the car. And I think more often than not, when you're in the car, you're not going to be consuming on YouTube. Not always, but this is where people most often listen to podcasts. But a lot of people may listen to podcasts using 2 different services.
Stay tuned. We've got that slide coming up too.
Can I just jump in real quick and say, I'm not surprised by YouTube being number 1. I am surprised at the discrepancy between Spotify and Apple. And maybe to Johnny's point, that's video. But I'm surprised that Spotify has pulled so far ahead of Apple.
Yeah, I am too. And I actually went through all my podcast stack, and there's like 70 podcasts I've got data for. And there's like 2 or 3 where Spotify is in the lead.
Neanderthal take on this, but I mean, as maybe the simplest answer is just that we have Apple Music and then there's Apple Podcasts. That's two separate apps that you have to manually cycle in between on your phone versus Spotify. With a tap of a finger, I've got my podcast and I've got my music.
Well, there's the answer right there then. We'll move on. Monthly podcast consumption is up, and they've done something differently here. And that's, as you can see, they've changed the methodology, or at least the asking procedure, but they still managed to keep the survey comparable with previous years. And they've done this by sort of asking and combining the watching and the listening. So it's 55 is the number. You know, like it used to be in the past, have you listened to a podcast? But they've also added in, have you watched a podcast? And so with those combined, the number is now 55%. But if it's just audio only, have you listened? The number is still up from the year before. So monthly podcast consumption growing, whichever way you want to phrase it.
Also good news.
Also good news. That's right. Okay. So Catherine, this is what we're talking about now is you know, is podcasting now mainstream? And I think this is the one that really puts it over. And that's podcasting achieving new heights of Americans who are now monthly consumers of it. At 55%, I think we can call this a mainstream medium.
Yeah.
Agree, disagree?
Agree. I mean, there's just, if you think about it, like, and this ties back into the Facebook usage where there's just a niche for everything now. So anecdotal evidence, my dad has in his hobby is farming. He listens to probably a dozen of these Midwestern uber niche, got to be less than 100 listeners per episode farming podcasts of guys just recording on their phones. And you multiply that out by every niche that's possibly out there. There's just so much. You can just do it about anything, any kind of niche, and there's an audience for it.
I was really hoping you were going to say recording on their tractor, Johnny. I was really hoping you were going to say that.
Trust me, he's sent me some doozies being like, can you help these people? And I'm like, I could, but I don't think I want to. It's too good the way it is.
As recently as maybe 5 years ago, or at least recently as 10 years ago, we wouldn't have seen something like a TV show depicting a podcaster. Or for fans of Saturday Night Live, which really is not a bad barometer of sort of what's in the zeitgeist in the U.S. I feel like once a month there's a spoof about a podcast, and that's really arrived. Yeah, it's arrived.
Monthly podcast consumption. I put in this slide up just to show that, you know, the demographics. So we've got the, you know, ages, you know, 12 to 34 and ages 35 to 54. The numbers are fairly similar between, you know, those who are listening in that group. And it's really people who are over the age of 55 who are not really all in on podcasting or are still hanging on to traditional media is what I would take away from the slide.
I noticed that growth in 2025 on the 55 plus though, Matt. And to me, that's, you know, when somebody has that stereotype of, oh, podcasting is a young person's game, I would show them this and say, that's what, 30% growth year over year in age 55 plus. There's obviously more room to grow, to your point, but there's something to that about older. I don't want to say older, but the 55 plus crowd finding podcasts.
Hey, yeah, be careful.
I was
older
carefully. Yeah.
Well, I like that green block between the 12 to 34 and the 35 to. Oh wait, no, sorry, I'm reading this wrong. Retract.
Okay.
Wait,
but to your,
go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, to your point, Jag, I think you're right. I think I would look at a number that has gone up at age 55 plus from 27 to 33 for the audio, and then you throw in the watching people, it takes it up to 38. That it's common. Catherine?
I was going to say that the other thing too is that this is a topic that'll come up later, is Gen X is becoming that 55 demographic. And we've long heard people saying this is the area, that 55 block is the greatest opportunity because it's been so low for so long. So I think that we are going to see people aging into that category nicely in the next couple of years.
David alluded to this earlier, and so this is one of the slides, and this is the slide that I think really sort of tells the tale about how well podcasting is doing, and that's weekly podcast consumption. And I think I always look at weekly podcast consumption because it means people are committed to the medium for at least one show per week. We've got a piece of their media pie, and so from that, it's up from 34 to 35 on the listening side. Then you throw in the people who watch, takes it all the way up to 40%. And so that's healthy, steady growth, I would say. Happy?
Happy.
We're all happy.
Does this head in one direction?
It's
Except in 2022 for some reason. Might have been a
COVID
COVID
ended.
thing. I don't know.
it was
Post-COVID,
it was
maybe.
definitely COVID. So if we want to go back to 2022, people were going back to work and had to people had to restart their lives again.
There's a bit of a
And-
dip on the creation side too, where people who started the podcast in 2020 got to 21 or 22 and said, "Hey, I'm not Joe Rogan making millions hands over fist here. This is harder than I thought." And those who wanted to make a quick buck kind of got out at that point, I think too.
Yeah. Also 2021, there was a huge increase, but everybody was at home. We had nothing to do, so we all listened to podcasts, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
I'm
from
wondering-
2022, going from there, that's incredible growth.
I'm wondering, and I thought about this with the last slide too, how much do you think for the U.S. federal elections played into some of these growth? Like, has there been a bump from the elections? We've already, as Superfriends, we've covered the topic of just the prominence of podcasts playing in the last elections last fall. And I'm wondering how many people stuck around with podcasting because of that. That might have been their interest or their entry point. And now we're seeing they've stuck with podcasting because it continues to sort of ride off of that success.
I think anytime you get somebody to listen to a podcast for the first time, that's a good thing.
For us, depends on the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but because also they would have been doing this sampling for 24 in the beginning of 24. So that's pre all the growth from the November, October times.
Yeah, I'm glad they've started to include the watch stuff too as well, because I think YouTube makes it really easy to put Joe Rogan on, to put
Right.
Whoever's on. It's just so easy to find. It's just very easy to find.
Yes.
I don't know why I put this slide in, but I just wanted to sort of show the differentiation and the separation between those who say they listen to a podcast, watched a podcast, or consumed a podcast. These were just the answers, as it were. So these were the takeaways from the Infinite Dial. Does anybody? I'll read them out. Podcast consumption is at an all-time high. All good news. Audio consumption for podcasts continues to grow, but podcasts using video are attracting more podcast consumers to the medium. And online audio adoption is at an all-time high. Not that we covered any of those particular slides.
Yeah, the second point is really telling to me because before Johnny Podcast gets up on a soapbox and starts screaming about the wonders of video, we'll point out that video is indeed growing rapidly, but audio is growing as well. So, a lot of people still celebrate podcasts as an audio first medium, but as the podcast Super Friends will almost unanimously tell you, I think, that you can't ignore video at this point. It's YouTube is just too powerful an engine to find podcasts.
David, man, you are on fire today because you have just led us into the next study, which is the state of video podcasting.
The segues.
Yeah, it's just outstanding. So this was the follow-up to the one we had when we had Jay Nakolas from Coleman Insights come on. They did it again. They went back in and took another look and asked a few more questions. And I think we're going to have a little bit more discussion with this one as we go through. So there it is again, the proper phrasing of when you ask people. And so if you ever do a survey, how do you consume podcasts would be the way you would phrase that on a survey. I pulled the Gen Z slide because we're going to have a Gen Z conversation. Gen Z is defined as between 15 and 29 years old. And we think of Gen Z as being very video, but the only audio people is at 10%, and the only video thing is 7%. And if you add those on, that's 17%. And in the middle, it turns out Gen Z is listening and using audio at a very high rate.
And I guess I can speak on this, but apparently I'm Gen Z, just at the very tippity top of it. It's funny with video podcasting and how you respond to this as being like, oh, I watch it, I listen to it. I think the big differentiator between like I watch a podcast, that has to be really defined of how long are you sitting and actually engaged, eyes with the screens, looking at the talking heads. A big cut out of that, maybe like what you said earlier, Matt, it's really easy to throw on Joe Rogan with the YouTube or whatever video podcast because of the YouTube apps that are available for TVs. So smart TV applications. I don't think, I know Spotify has a smart TV app. I haven't really explored as to whether I can play a video podcast through Spotify on the TV. Put that aside. Personal consumption, a lot of the podcasts that I consume are video first, and that's just because they happen to be on Spotify. I am not watching it at all. I am playing the podcast, clicking it off, and putting my phone back in my pocket and listening to the episode. Does that mean that I've now watched a video podcast because it's a video podcast? There's some discrepancy there as to what that actually means.
And Gen Z has its own definition of watch because I mean, my son who's 23, he'll every time I watch TV with him, he's watching TV, but he's also on his device. He's watching. Yeah. He's watching two things at the same time, and I don't. So many of them do that. So it's like they got one eye on it and one eye, but it's still. So I think fair to say, as you say, Johnny, in a way, maybe we could get you to agree that it's still audio first, but just don't ignore the video. We'll fight about it later.
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Next slide I wanted to pull up is, and I think this one is one that I would love to just keep in my back pocket. And I think this is very handy for anybody who says, well, I'm going to do a video podcast and I'm going to skip the audio. 77% of podcast consumers alternates between audio and video. I have this thing in my head where I totally believe that people will discover something on YouTube and then in their mind think, yeah, I'm going to listen to that in the car later. I'm going to listen to that at the gym today. I'm going to listen to that on my run. Something like that is clearly happening. And last year it was 75% when we had Jay on from Coleman Insights, and this time around it's up to 77%. Does anybody actually replicate that behavior or can speak to it?
I can. There are times, it just depends on what app I happen to have open at the time. If I have Spotify open and Bill Simmons puts out a podcast, I'll listen to it there. But if it pops up in my YouTube feed, I'll click on it there.
I like to save for later, as you mentioned, Matt. Sorry, Catherine. Where it's I'll see clips on Facebook or Instagram Reels of Julian Edelman's podcast called Games with Names, which is hysterical, by the way, and I love it. But I'll add it to my Spotify queue audio on my phone. And if I'm somewhere where, I mean, these episodes are 2-3 hours. If I'm going to be somewhere where I'm in the car for a long time, or I'm going to be preoccupied for a while, or a long walk or something, I'll listen to it on Spotify after finding it originally, seeing the video, and I'll listen to the audio version when I'm not in front of a screen.
I do basically the same thing. This must be my Zoomer quality. I will do the same thing that Jag just described.
We will happily accept you, Catherine, in the Zoomer tribe. You can reclassify.
I mean, one of the things that is maybe a theme that runs throughout this is that podcasts are really the new talk shows. I mean, you think back to like the McLaughlin Group, or I remember I used to watch the sports reporters on ESPN, and I still watch Pardon the Intro. So talk shows have been around forever, and we love them. But most of the stuff we're consuming are the words, and the talking heads are nice. So you could watch them, but I mean, certain of those TV talk shows are now podcasts as well, and the audio is absolutely no different than the video. So podcasts are the new talk shows, and you can consume it either way. I mean, in some instances, your experience might be enhanced with the video, but sometimes you don't lose much at all.
Like in this episode, for instance, for all our audience now, if you are not watching this on YouTube, you are missing out on just 80% on this.
Does Johnny even know what McLaughlin Group was?
All of that was just, I just didn't even register any of it.
It's YouTube.
It's on you. I'm sure it's on YouTube.
Yeah.
So David, I think you touched on this earlier, and you were talking about people where they consume the video podcasts. And so here are the numbers. I'm just delivering the numbers, everyone. 88% it's at home, 37% doing errands and chores, 35% walking, 28% driving a car or riding in the car.
Great.
Like 24% at work and 19% on public transportation. I don't see these people holding their phone up and watching this stuff. So, Johnny, how's this working here?
Well, again, it's the definition of what does consume video mean? Are we
Right.
glancing at it at the red light? Do I have it just kind of it's balanced up against my dash and it's kind of just on in the background, or is it a video on YouTube or a video podcast that has then been clicked off, but since it's classified as a video podcast, I've consumed a video podcast. I really appreciate Coleman and Edison for all of the data collection that they do. One request from me would be we just have to classify what that even means.
Or a worst case scenario, or that you're that person in the subway playing a video podcast on speakerphone.
Right to jail. Right to jail.
Do not pass go. Do not collect $200.
How easy? I mean, the user experience, whether it's on YouTube or Spotify, just to listen to the show if you can't watch it. For years, YouTube it would turn off unless you had the premium. Is that still like that?
I believe that's still
So,
the deal there. And then also there's, well, I guess DAI may have evened the scales out a little bit between YouTube and Spotify, but there's also the factor of the ads that will pop up on YouTube as well. So that's a constant picking it back up, skip, click it, put it back down. And then, but with advertising and podcasting on the audio side anyway, you're still going to run into that too.
I want to make it clear for the audience that we're just showing a couple slides. So if you wanted to see how people were, using, what they were doing while they were listening to audio, go get the slides that from the people who have done this. I'm going to put in the show notes, like the website you can go to go and grab it, and you can help yourself to the full study. We're just showing the stuff just for conversation here today, and some of the things that I found interesting. We're playing the hits here today. We are playing the hits, as it were, here today. All right, next slide. Which service, app, or destination do you currently use most often to consume podcasts among audio-only consumers? And I think this is what made me go through and check everything. Finding that Spotify was at 37%, Apple at 26%, and YouTube was at 13%. In my stack, I only have like 2 podcasts where Spotify is in the lead. So do you guys have that? Does it sort of reflect what you're dealing with?
I am a little bit surprised that Spotify has that large a lead over Apple Podcasts. I mean, not that surprised. We all know Spotify has been growing, but to me, Apple Podcasts still offers a couple of advantages just in terms of usability in getting to your podcast, getting to the one you want to listen to right away. And sometimes and I'm not technically proficient enough to know what this phenomenon is like, but Spotify will cut out more than Apple if you're in a bad zone. That's my experience has been. So what's it called? Buffering. Am I talking about buffering? I guess. I don't know.
Well, Spotify is often a progressive download, right?
Matt, was there
listening to it? Yeah.
Was there data collected in the age groups between users of Spotify versus Apple? That may have been a step too deep.
No, there probably is.
Okay, because my immediate thought to that is, if I'm putting myself in the younger person's category, everything you like, Spotify Wrapped is the big thing that everyone has. They're putting it on their Instagram at the end of the year, on their Snapchat. It just seems to be the quote unquote younger person's app, and as that becomes the larger demographic of people consuming podcasts, if they're Spotify first before they got Apple Podcasts, that may lead to more people being, simply by virtue of more younger people listening to podcasts on Spotify equals more Spotify downloads.
I'll buy that. I think also that we're all working with podcasts with heritage, a few years old.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're going to continue to see a lot more Apple than Spotify coming in. Jag?
I think a variable, I'm not sure how significant this is, but how often are these hosts, or how are they promoting their show? Are they promoting the Apple link first? Are they promoting the Spotify link first? I'm not sure how much that weighs on the overall equation here, but I've definitely had shows that have leaned into more promotion of their YouTube or their Apple or their Spotify, and the numbers have changed as a result as far as what their preferred platform to promote is. It's a lot of P's, I'm sorry.
And it isn't the sentence, Jag, that most of the hosts that we work with use when we say, "Hey, you got to promote your podcast." I think it's verbatim every single time. It's follow us on Apple,
Apple,
Spotify, or wherever you
Spotify.
can, or wherever you consume
Yeah.
your podcast. Apple comes first, and then Spotify. And it's just a really interesting data point. Why there just simply are more people on Spotify according to this.
Well, if you promote it on, Apple and Spotify, you've got a whole lot of the podcast space covered according to this.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's good. I think also, just because you promote it on Apple or Spotify doesn't mean people are going to go listen to it. I'm not going to change platforms and change my app just because you told me to.
And then one last point for maybe our video phobic listeners and viewers, for at least the podcasters who are just still hesitant about getting on camera. According to that statistic out there, the number of people consuming audio podcasts on YouTube is greater than 0. So it's
Right,
okay to
yes.
put your audio podcast on YouTube. You can get it up there. Just get it on there just for discoverability. There is that 7% out there.
Please.
There is a handful of people out there that want your content. They're only consuming on YouTube, and they'll find you, and they won't care that it's audio only.
And Johnny has led us in perfectly to the next slide, which will also encourage you to jump into some video. And that's how do you discover new podcasts? And 57% said through social media post or conversation. Interesting. That is the new leader, by the way. So it used to be friends and family.
Yeah.
And we are now spending so much time scrolling and not talking to our family that this has now become the new leader. 49% said a podcast app or service, and a podcast host at 42%.
I have a
So
question here, Matt, if I may.
Yep.
So 49% say through a podcast app or service. It's always been my guidance to my clients. Don't worry about the Apple charts. Don't worry about that. And I stand by that. But a podcast app or service, does that mean they're going into Apple or Spotify or YouTube and searching a particular subject or topic?
There's recommendations that come. Sometimes you turn on Spotify and there's a display of things you might want to listen to. If you're in Overcast, you can actually pay to promote a show to put it up there. There's the new and noteworthy in Apple, which will show up when you complete a show. You may get, for example, when this show is over, you might get recommended to go check out the new media show or another show about podcasting. So there's things like that. So you discover it inside the app. Maybe the artwork lured you in some capacity.
But that's more recommendations than charts, I would say, though, right?
Correct.
Yes.
I will say, from my experience, even today, I spent some time today on Spotify, just on the podcasts page, on the homepage, and just scrolling to see what I would see. It's pretty much a glorified, hey, here's what's in your feed. It's expanded versions of each episode that's new of the shows I already subscribed to. There was maybe 1 or 2 new shows recommended. I think Apple does a good job of, when you scroll underneath the show, of, hey, this is stuff that's similar to this show.
And I would say even better, YouTube is even better at that. So that could potentially be an area where YouTube really shines in the future.
On which of the following social media platforms did you discover a new podcast for the first time in the past few months?
Good Lord. The top 2 spots are by one company.
Yeah. So it's YouTube at 59% and Shorts at 41%. All right. Followed by, is that Reels? What is that?
That's Instagram.
TikTok? Yeah. No, it's
the third one is Reels.
The third one is Reels, and then it's
Reels.
TikTok.
Then
Fourth would
Insta.
be Instagram, and followed by Facebook, and then X. Who's the one here who suggested that they not stop using X to promote their show last month? That was me. And Snapchat.
But I can tell you have been. So as one of your many followers.
I know.
You didn't take your
started
own
again.
advice.
I know. I didn't. I put the app back on and started again. We have an election in Canada. We're trying our best.
Yeah. I've heard some of the your candidates have tried to do the podcast strategy.
Is it work?
Well, we'll find out shortly. Give us another week. We'll get back to you with the results. But here we are with YouTube and YouTube Shorts being a monster. So nobody's going to argue this, right?
Okay,
Go ahead.
podcast.
Go ahead, Johnny. Go ahead and just say you told us.
Go get your podcast on YouTube, get your camera plugged in, just throw it on there. There's a million tools out there. I use Opus Clips. You upload your podcast right to it. It'll give you 30 shorts. You can auto schedule them with any number of social media, delivery, SaaS company services. It's just it's easy to just litter YouTube and YouTube Shorts with content.
Who's watching YouTube Shorts?
I do.
Like, do you scroll or something?
Yeah, I scroll.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's for I apologize to the audience for just giving just heaps of anecdotal evidence today, but yeah, no, I'm morally I don't have TikTok just because not because of the China thing, but just because I think that platform is just not good.
Mhm.
And you could say the same thing about Reels, you could say the same thing about YouTube Shorts, but I don't have Instagram on my phone, I don't have Twitter on my phone, I have YouTube. And so YouTube automatically leads to YouTube Shorts. And then if I feel a need, I need to scroll for a little bit, scroll something, YouTube Shorts is right there for you.
Okay. When you post a short for one of your clients, how many views would you get?
I can pull one up.
All right. Does anybody else have any? Because every time I post a YouTube short, they all get exactly 500 to 1,000. That's it. And
Yep,
they all seem to get the same. I feel like the algorithm shuts me down.
It's very, very little engagement, very few thumbs up, very few comments. The stuff that works that I have seen with clients is controversial stuff. So political, racial, things like that, where it's going to get the goal. And it's the same with social media. The goal of engagement and click farming and clickbaiting is to create division. Here's a really one-sided edge of the spectrum take on something so that everyone who's the 80% of people who disagree with that are going to comment and say that's bull, that sucks, that's wrong, here's why you're wrong. Or the people that agree with them, yeah, that's great, we should really do that. And then the people comment on that, you're crazy, you're wrong. And it works for both sides. And that's what social media is. That's what works. Not, hey, how did you build your business to $500 million? I want to hear about what happened, in the Senate or whatever the hell's going on.
All right.
To add on to Johnny's anecdotal evidence and to your question, Matt, I have found probably even more since the last time the Super Friends got together, I have found myself with some YouTube shorts that there is a way for the creator to put a link to the full thing where this episode came from. It's not a link in the description. It's actually a link on the user interface of the short. So you can just click through and get to the full episode of whatever the short came from. I have actually found myself clicking those more often to see we got the little taste, the little taste is free. And then you go and watch the full video. So in my own behavior, I've seen that has come up before where I don't think I ever did that previously.
So where the short takes you to the long.
Short takes you to the long. Yeah.
All right.
Much more succinct way of saying that.
Yeah. Here's another one that is interesting, and it's on the smart TV side. And that's which devices do you use to consume podcasts on YouTube? And I think somebody mentioned it earlier in the show today. Johnny did about smart TV action and using YouTube as a full-fledged TV channel, not just on your smartphone at 79%, but on your smart TV at the same rate as computer now, because both are at 46%.
Huh.
I wonder too, because I know that Spotify, you can't, I know, Johnny, you were saying, I've been to people's houses and they're running playlists off of Spotify through their smart TV. So I wonder if that's part of the bump that Spotify is getting, is just the fact that if you're already using it on your smart TV, you're already halfway there to now listening to your podcast there. Sorry, Jag.
No, I was going to say, the smart TV thing is interesting to me because I know if we're watching TV at night, my wife and I, we're almost as likely to be watching something from one of our favorite YouTubers as we are network or cable television. And we have YouTube TV for our cable providers. So every night it's about 50-50 whether we're on YouTube or YouTube TV for traditional OTT television.
This is more of blurred lines, right? Because if you're sitting in a living room, you could be on your tablet, you could be on your computer, you could be on your smart TV. In many cases, you could be on your phone and you could hit the AirPlay button and get it onto the TV. I think that's going to start becoming more user friendly. I mean, I watch YouTube on smart TV sometimes, but the reason I probably don't as much is just because the search isn't as seamless, and nobody likes typing, whatever you call it, when you have to take the remote and go over to the M and then the A, and now I can do it
microphone. Just use the voice search.
Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Spotify does allow the video app to play a podcast. I have it pulled up on over here. I have my PlayStation plugged in over here, and I just pulled up the Spotify app and threw on a podcast, and it's playing right now.
If you go to buy a TV,
doing two things at once, he's on the Superfriends live stream and consuming a podcast at the same time. Just kidding.
If you go to buy a TV, aren't they all smart TVs now? Because the previous study from Edison did show that smart TV, they're over 80% now. So
they're just getting smarter.
They really are.
Dumber.
Okay, this is why I don't take the slides off the screen, because I'll forget where we were in the whole thing here. We are now at how do you consume podcasts on Spotify? This is a very important slide, because I think we sort of touched on this earlier about what's happening inside Spotify.
This is Johnny's question here.
Yeah, 83% are listening to it on the audio. Playing a video podcast in the background or minimizing the device while listening, that's at 31%. And actively watching a video podcast is at 25%. So this is one that I think is important for people to know, is that just, on Spotify, people treat it as a place to listen. And when Spotify made the pivot into, okay, we're going to do video, it's a nice add-on, but you're not going to be able to ask people to change the way they consume everything right away.
Right. Maybe not yet. I look at the 25% and say it's not that surprising, because it's still a relatively new feature. I mean, I admit I haven't even tried it yet. So,
well, and I look at it too, David, as I agree with you. And also, the majority of podcasts are talking head shows. So there has to be podcasts out there that are a lot more interactive. Like, I would like to think that those, the true crime things, those shows, I don't consume any of those podcasts, but I'd like to think that there's a lot of opportunity for visual elements, for data to be shown, making it more like a TV show.
The
majority of podcasts are just two people talking.
Yeah.
I wonder about that, because if that's true, then the lines are blurring between the Netflix true crime documentaries and the podcast, the scripted podcast true crime that are true crime. And I don't know. The thing is, those Netflix, true crime documentaries, the ones that are done well, that's a massive production that costs millions and millions of dollars. The true crime podcast, which can be excellent, everything that came out of the Serial phenomenon, not breakfast cereal, the podcast Serial, those can be, those are, a lot of them really well produced, but can be done a lot cheaper than the video. So I'll be interested to see whether those lines blur.
Actually, if anybody wants to, they can listen to the Pod News Weekly Review with James Cridlin and Sam Sethi. Last week, they had Maya Prahovnik from Spotify, who came on to talk about Spotify video. So, and what the strategy is, how they're rolling it out. Some best practices are in there as well. So if you're thinking about going to Spotify just to, change over from audio to video, that's worth a listen before you make your decision. And I think as podcast producers, it's something we should all listen to as well. Okay, so they also polled the creators. The creators are some of the people that's us who does this. So how do you feel about the degree of difficulty of creating video podcasts? Somewhat difficult is 53%. 13% is very difficult. You add those up, that's 66%. Nearly 2/3 find this somewhat bothersome or difficult that we have to do video, Johnny.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Johnny.
It's super understandable, because I was just about to say, it's the editing and the production and the technology, and it's not so much about creating the compelling content. It's more about just okay, I'm able to get my voice to people in a sonically pleasing way, but now I have to do lighting and camera, and why can't I just use my laptop camera? Oh, but when I have my laptop set up, it's at a weird angle. I need to get this stick now that holds up a new camera. And how do I plug the camera in to do this? And well, I have 2 people on, but I want it to cut back and forth between who's talking. How do I do all of that? Hire one of us to do it. We'll do it for you at a reasonable fee, and it'll look and sound beautiful. But it is difficult to do, and it makes a ton of sense, because before, you just record your audio, a little bit of editing and slicing and dicing, and you're off to the races. Now it's a whole other game, and people feel a little bit of added pressure because they're seeing the Joe Rogan's doing it. They're seeing Theo Vaughn do it. They're seeing all of the top podcasters are now, oh my God, they have video on Spotify now and it looks beautiful. What kind of cameras are they using? There's that added pressure as well to make it seem like I have to keep up with the Joneses, the Joneses being the top 1% of creators.
Right.
So 66% of folks say it's somewhat difficult. That means 34% of folks are lying.
Yeah. But one thing we have
producers.
One thing we haven't talked about is how many podcasts are on YouTube that only feature a static image of the podcast logo. And to that, you know, when I first heard that was a phenomenon, I was like, well, what's the point? But then I quickly realized that it's better to be a heck of a lot better to be on YouTube than not. But, you know, just to echo what Johnny said yes, it is a chore to make your video look good. And if you're just slapping up a Zoom call, you're not doing yourself any favors, really. So,
whoa, David, don't hate on Zoom. You are the Zoom ambassador of this entire crew.
I take Zoom and I make, you know, a Zoom
turn
phenomenon.
it into gold. Yeah.
No, there's nothing wrong with using Zoom as the platform, but if when the video you post just looks like a Zoom call, mine don't, Johnny. I dress them up.
I know.
But anyway, the point is you'll have a much easier deal working with one of us, because there are ways to do it. But yeah, it takes time. So I think I agree with Jag. I think a lot of people, more people than not, will find it a big leap after. And I sympathize with those like DIY podcasters that just figured it out. They just figured out how to edit it and get that intro music so it doesn't sound all clunky, and to get the audio sounding good. And now it's like cameras, lighting, the whole deal.
By the way, have you made a thumbnail before? And you're like, I just figured out
I know, right?
editing.
Right.
Yeah.
I would like to just mention something about what, you know, the video in the top 1%, which is actually becoming the top 10%, who can really put on a pretty decent show on video. That, because I had a few music podcasters say, well, the artists don't want to come on my show. I'm like, yeah, your video sucks. And they're seeing other podcasters with nice lighting, really well set up. You know, it looks like a studio show. That's what you're up against.
Right.
Like, you know, if you want to interview whoever, a star, they're going to go and they're probably going to look at your YouTube, and it's, you got to put some effort into it. And I'm sorry to increase budgets and stuff like that, but, and to, you know, give you lots to do. But if you really do want to have, you know, sexy guests, big names on your show, you're going to have to tidy it up. Sorry.
And prove that you can tidy them up too. Like if they're not only looking at, it's, let's say we're doing a remote podcast. It's one thing to not be able to control the guest's environment, but you have to be able to look at it and go, okay, whoever was on the back end of this show put some real effort into the fact that that guest didn't have a microphone. That guest's lighting sucked. They were off to the side, not even in the center of the frame. But they made a concerted effort to fix that. And then there's the fun things like, oh, there's a lower third graphic with their website that popped up and their name. That thing can cover up a lot of the blemishes of stuff that's out of your control. But if you're doing none of that, then yes, Matt, that even adds on top of it. Like this is just going to make me look bad if I go on this show.
Just like people that are watching this on video right now, we don't necessarily all have fancy cameras, but you know, those chyrons are nice. The layout is nice, right?
The last study we're going to talk about today is a tech survey. This is done by Jacobs Media out of Detroit. I like this one because of the way their methodology that they do it. and I think I might have put that in. They grabbed commercial radio stations across North America. In this case, they had 24,500 people respond, but it's who they're reaching out to. They're reaching out to P1 radio listeners. So they do this by going through email databases or maybe like a website link on a popular radio station website, and then people can fill out the data. So you're dealing with people who are high users of radio or fans of radio stations. So P1 would be a P1 type listeners are what they're after here. And so they actually start when they start this thing, they do the takeaways up front. And so these are all the takeaways. You can go in and grab them all. Broadcast radio treading water, personalities more popular than music for the 7th year in a row. We can see the mistakes that radio is making, but I wanted to just bring in the podcast portion of this. And Catherine has forced me to talk about one other thing a little bit later on. But this, I think, is really important from this survey. And that's many drivers in cars are paying attention to dashboard and metadata. They also like real-time news and information about weather, traffic, and news. And so this is what I want to implore. And maybe there's some pushback here. We have to tidy up our metadata, and we have to have nice artwork.
Matt, we should do a deep dive into ID3 data and how podcasters can tag their stuff like that. Because even I'm still a little confused on getting all that correct. I will have shows where I will put in the name of the episode, the artist, the show, the genre, the year, the website, and for whatever reason, it doesn't cross over to my publisher, where if I put it on the podcast episode in the car, it'll still say the name of the episode, but then the artist is unknown.
Yeah. So ID3 tags, I know they just, I think a lot of hosts just don't
do it.
Yeah. They're just not there.
Yeah.
Anything with that. But, but I think when you look at Apple CarPlay, artwork is in there. Titling. Also, this is an argument, by the way, for not putting episode 34 dash.
Right.
Like take that out of there. We don't need that.
Could there also be, Matt? Could you go back to the 11 takeaways? Is there, or maybe I'm just pulling this out of my rear, but is there consensus here that maybe the culture is shifting a little bit to be more minimalistic? We just have so much thrown at us every single day that maybe people are shifting towards, you know what, I'd rather than spend 10 minutes to figure the perfect playlist on Spotify for my 10-minute drive, I'd rather just turn on the radio, and whatever's good that I come across, I'm just going to listen to that.
Yeah. So in the survey, they did talk about a lot of the things that radio is really good at. Local, it's really good at, and free.
Yeah.
And this local and free, I think, were two of the ones at the top, and favorite personalities and favorite music. I think people do enjoy having music curated for them. And also found out that a lot of the time when people left radio stations is because their favorite radio personality was fired.
Where was that 15 years ago? Jeez.
I know.
Matt, I did notice that in these takeaways, the local focus, it was very, very familiar to when we've talked to other people who suggest that local podcasting is a real opportunity. There's a lot of crossover here with this list and that concept of if you're delivering something to a local audience, it's like niche upon niche, but that is where you get a lot of engagement and you get people really responding. If it's scratching that itch, a very particular itch, you're really delivering something that a dedicated group of people are looking for, you can be really successful. Now, again, I don't come from radio like you guys do, but I can just imagine it would be very hard. You can't support all the staff and all the personalities by just having this sort of narrow product. So I sympathize. I can see sort of the same tensions in podcasting, from our perspective or the podcasting perspective. So there's a lot of sort of competing drives going on there. Yes, no?
I don't know why live podcasting hasn't been more. I mean, we're streaming, right? And so, you can put a tag in an app when you go live that your phone can say, hey, so-and-so is live. And and then from that, Johnny, out comes the metadata where we can put, real-time data here. I mean, this example that is shown here on the screen talks about, donating to hurricane relief, but, time, temperature, and traffic and stuff like that should be able to be built into the stuff we can stream, where we can, sort of take a little bit of live and local from radio and become little radio stations ourselves. Just not sure why we're behind.
I think it has to do with the perception of podcasts. Podcasts are perceived as on demand versus live, and I don't think it's in the mindset of folks for it to be live yet. But there might be growth opportunity there for sure.
We're live now. People who wouldn't want to listen to this on their drive home today.
I think more podcasters are taking advantage of the live functionality, and the way that they're doing that is by pivoting over to YouTube. And YouTube has, so real life example for all our listeners now, if you go to the podcast, if you go to any one of our YouTube channels that this is streaming off of, and you click the notification bell, it will ping to your phone whenever we're live. So they may not have that application now for Apple or Spotify, but YouTube certainly has the ability to do that.
There's a podcast that I follow very closely, and sometimes I'll catch the live stream, and literally 10 minutes after the live stream ends, it's being delivered to my phone as a download for the podcast in my podcast app.
I wanted to just go back with the metadata, and I put 3 slides in about this just to show that it really comes from the younger end of Gen Z and millennials, who really do expect and want to see metadata in any space where it is available. So they're the ones who are asking for this. So it is at the younger end. So, what do I have left? Why did I put this in? I don't remember. Anyhow, there we go. Podcasting's reach among radio fans hits an all-time high, while video versions of podcasts are growing in popularity. So again, we're talking about P1 radio listeners here who are really finding their way into podcasts and enjoying them a little bit more. So they are discovering on-demand audio. I think when you guys don't say anything, I think it means we all just sort of knew this, right?
Yeah.
I would say so.
Well, I have a sort of a radio question for our radio people here. One of the things I thought about when I was reviewing this slide was the idea that it's almost like radio isn't the thing. It used to be that radio was the thing, but now somebody who wants to be successful in radio, it's like they might have a slot in radio, but then they also have to be building a social media following, and they have to have a good crowd following them on social media, and they have to have a podcast that is different than what they did on the air. So it's like now we really have to create this literally like a platform where they're delivering different things. They maybe have an email newsletter and the stream and the social media. They can't just rely on being that personality on the radio. Is there any weight to that at all?
Absolutely.
Jag is not.
Stephen A. Smith is a good example of that.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Sorry.
Maybe not like if you don't, whether you enjoy his content or not, but he's signed to ESPN television, radio. I'll just lump that in for this example. Signed to ESPN to do ESPN sports, basketball, football, whatever. Then he has his own podcast on the side where he does a lot more politics and current events, where he'll have on guests. And it seems like there's that spread of, I can talk about a lot more things on the Stephen A. Smith show. I'll still talk about sports in some capacity, but there's going to be a lot more stuff that I can talk about that I can't necessarily do when I'm on air at ESPN.
They pay him a lot of money to scream at people. But back to Catherine's point, it's fish where the fish are, and you've got to have your billboard and your brand where your radio listeners are. And to the Jacobs Media point here, the radio listeners are consuming podcasts. They're on social media. I mean, that was, at the end, my twilight in radio was 8 years ago, but even then it was, you got to have a presence on social to be able to relate to your audience. You can't trust that they're going to set their bat phone to turn into the radio at a certain time. You've got to be where they are. That's why I had Snapchat as a 35-year-old, because I was at a top 40 station. That's where the audience was in 2016. So
the world's oldest Snapchat user.
I was at one point, yes.
Catherine, did you want to talk about the opportunity that was pointed out in this survey And
I
that was
just wanted
the,
to say the in red item number 11, the bonus takeaway. Oh, how the turntables. Look at now, we're trying to cater to Gen X. For the first time ever, Gen X, oh, we need you, Gen X. Come on, save us. Just because we grew up with our parents not allowing us to turn the dial in the radio doesn't mean we can save you now. That's all I'm saying.
what does the Gen X radio station sound like anyway?
Red Hot Chili Peppers.
How dare you?
Oh, I'd say it's earlier than that.
Arctic Monkeys.
Yeah, that's us trying
Depeche
to
Mode?
be relatable.
A guy with a really soft voice talking about his favorite latte of the day that he found that was $9 in Portland. Maybe that's millennial.
Yeah,
That's
it
definitely
is.
millennial. Yeah. As the
You don't even know.
millennial group,
See,
I'll
you
vouch
can't
for
even
that.
burn us because you don't even know because that's
I don't
how we've
understand
been.
you.
And Gen Xers have the thickest skin ever because everybody ignored them anyway.
Our motto, whatever.
No, we've been ignored. I couldn't believe. I thought it was going to be a time where there'd be like something called Gen X radio in every market, and nothing.
Steely Dan.
Steely Dan.
No,
That's
too old.
a little early. That's David.
That's David.
I don't care for Steely Dan.
Only someone here had an intimate knowledge of music.
Oh,
and their
yeah. I
time
wonder if
And you had a
period and
podcast
what was
about it.
popular about.
Oh, yeah. Well,
decades?
in my podcast, we recently interviewed Peter Wolf, the lead singer of the Jay
Oh,
Gans
wow.
band. You might know him, but you might not.
Well, what's the podcast
yeah.
called, David?
It's called Past Tens, and you guys, you had to drill it out of me or whatever.
We can't end the show if we don't talk about
All
it.
right, it's called
Past Tens, a top 10 time machine.
TimeMachinePod.com. Thank you.
How did you get Peter Wolf?
Had a mutual friend, a guy, a radio guy, the great Chachi Lopret, longtime Boston radio producer for WBCN, has always been good friends with Peter Wolf. So I've been begging my friend Chachi to get Peter Wolf on the show, and he was delightful. He has a new book out that everyone should check out. It's a fascinating book.
And for the wait, Johnny, do you know who Peter Wolf played music with? What
I
group?
know Marty Wolf from Big Fat Liar.
All right. I think that's about it. How'd we do?
We did great.
David, you are our angel
right.
in a centerfold.
Does anybody want to encapsulate all that? And does anybody have any takeaways from those three webinars? Did anybody learn anything here today?
I did it, and that's that. Yes, video is the future, but audio is the future also. So don't neglect your excellent content, especially if it's audio first, just to dive willy-nilly into video. But don't ignore video, because a lot of people are going to find your podcast that way.
I love that.
Drop the mic.
Matt's priors confirmed.
A top 10 time machine.
All right.
That's a callback.
Yeah.
We'll go around and say goodbye, everyone. We'll start with Catherine. And then we will go counterclockwise.
Yeah. I'll start it off. Here we go. Thanks everybody for listening. My name is Catherine O'Brien, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. You can follow me on Twitter /X. Hello, Catherine O.
I've been Johnny Podcast. If you are watching on YouTube, be sure to hit the notification bell so that you know exactly when we're going live.
David Yazin, BostonPod617.com, the Boston Podcast Network. TimeMachinePod.com is the music podcast. Yay.
John Gay, Jag in Detroit Podcast, jagindetroit.com, or Jag in Detroit on your favorite social media app. Not Snapchat anymore.
Matt Kundle from the Sound Off Podcast Network. By the way, if you want copies of any of these studies, like the full ones, you can get them. They're in the show notes of this episode. They'll be clickable inside all the audio apps and whatnot and so forth. That, give them a review and download them and enjoy them. Thanks a lot. See ya.
Thanks for listening to the podcast Super Friends. For a transcript of the show or to connect with the Super Friends, go to the show notes of this episode or go to soundoff.network.